Good evening and welcome to another episode of Close Up. On our first episode tonight, we will be talking to the executives of the Fiji National Provident Fund and discussing specific issues pertaining to FNPF's liquidity management and solvency. My guest tonight, the Acting Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Pravinesh Singh, and the Chief Investment Officer, Mr. Viliame Vondonevalu. Gentlemen, welcome to the show tonight.
Welcome. Thank you, Stella.
Mr. Singh, I'll start with you first. Over the past year, there's been a lot of concerns shared publicly and on social media platforms about FNPF's liquidity, especially since the COVID-19 withdrawals started. In addition to that, FNPF had to activate natural disaster withdrawals for TC Herald and YASA and continue to disburse funds through your normal withdrawal grounds. Can you tell us about the fund's financial status at the moment?
Thank you, Stella. I think this is a valid concern from members who have their funds in FNPF, the valuable savings here, and they need to get that comfort, be assured whether their funds are safe. And in the past year, since COVID has entered the world, and in Fiji, where FNPF and the government has rolled out this assistance to the affected employees. A lot of members especially are taking onto social media platforms and voicing their concerns whether the fund has adequate cash to meet future withdrawals or to pay retirement funds and to pay annuities. I would not dwell too much on the financials as at 30th June, although they were audited, but more important is to address the growing concerns on liquidity. Members' funds at the end of 2020, June 2020 was about 6.3 billion. But in the last couple of months, we would see that the contribution rates were reduced. In fact, last year, April, the 18% contribution was legislated downwards to 10%. That basically means our contribution that were collected from employers and employees, the 10 and 8%, had come down to 10%, 5 and 5. And that actually impacted our contribution income almost by 390 million. So you see, that's a big blow to our finances, because based on the contributions we collect, then we can invest and earn returns. And that also impacts our ability to pay withdrawals. And again, a number of jobs were lost. A lot of people had gone on reduced pay. So FNPF had to meet these growing financial needs of our members. Whilst on one hand our inflows had come down, on the other hand, our withdrawals continued to grow. Just to give you some perspective, contributions came down by 44%, which equates to about 390 million. And now we've budgeted around 300 million for the year. So that's a reduction of almost close to 400 million. On the other hand, the withdrawals that were in the last year was about 400 million. Now we are projecting withdrawals to grow to almost 623 million. It's because of the COVID assistances we are paying. So to give members that the comfort and the assurance that FNPF continues to remain sustainable and solvent, we need to assure our members that FNPF has in no time stopped any withdrawals. So we have not rationed any capital. So if anybody who's turning 55 today comes to FNPF and wants to withdraw their full lump sum, FNPF has not said, no, we'll give you only 50%. If somebody is coming to FNPF, a member is coming to FNPF to claim assistance, a pre-retirement assistance under withdrawal and from their general account, FNPF has not stopped them. We didn't say, okay, we will stop your education, we will stop your medical, we won't fund you for your house. Until to date, ever since COVID, we've seen the withdrawals have gone up. Whilst on the same note, there was some panic created around June when we saw a lot of members who had come to withdraw. But FNPF continues to pay out these withdrawals, continues to invest, and has not in fact stopped any of the withdrawal grounds, or is not even looking at changing any of the withdrawal grounds for now. So those are the assurances we can give that FNPF remains in a strong position. In fact, our cash at the moment is about 500 million. Yes, Billy? So it is a challenge to meet because we are not out of COVID yet. So we will have to continue to manage our liquidity, look at cash flows. In fact, we have a liquidity committee meeting every fortnight, and which consists of CEO, CIO and myself. and a director. So we monitor our inflows and outflows. So that's been done almost every day. The Treasury Department does it, so that we have enough capital ready to pay out these assistances. So we're not in a position we say, okay, we will not pay you today, you come back tomorrow. So these are the comforts we can give.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Singh. And now, Mr. Vondonevalu, from the investment perspective, how does FNPF ensure it remains financially stable, especially during times like these when there's a lot of demand in terms of withdrawals?
Yeah, Stella. Under any liquidity situation, it's either you're operating under normal condition or a crisis situation. So normally we are guided by a policy. So one of the requirements is to maintain a liquidity buffer. That is to cover, possible funds that can be called at any time. So apart from that, also we do matching. So any liability projected to be maturing in any particular month or year, we actually match fund with the investment also. So. Also, we've got a backup plan. We've got arrangement with RBF if there's an intention to sell back investment in particular government paper. We also have recourse if you want to recall government investment. There's an intent.
Thank you for that. Don't go away. We'll have more discussions after this break. Welcome back to our second segment. For those of you who have just tuned in, my guest tonight is the Acting Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Pravnesh Singh, as well as the Chief Investment Officer, Mr. Viliame Vondonevalu. Mr. Singh, in terms of FNPF's financial statements in the 2020 annual report, what level of independent or third-party validations are undertaken by the fund?
Thank you, Stella. I think very important for our members to note that FNPF just doesn't go and tell its members that we've made so much profit and this is our collection, this is our assets. Under the Act and under prudential guidelines set by our regulator, the Reserve Bank of Fiji, we are mandated to ensure that we have an external auditor. In fact, our auditor at the moment is PricewaterhouseCoopers. They come and audit our financial statements every year. And then they certify whether the books of accounts have been kept properly, whether there are any major frauds or not. So these are straightforward accounting requirements. Apart from that, the fund has an actuary. The role of the actuary is to make sure there are sufficient assets, more than sufficient assets, to make sure that when a member comes of age, there are sufficient assets or sufficient cash to pay out the member's liability. So in fact, just to give you some perspectives from the numbers, at the moment the fund's total assets sits around 7.9 billion. This is, I'm quoting the numbers from 30th June 2020 audited accounts. So 7.9 billion in assets, whilst the total member funds stand around 6.3 billion. So in effect, when you do the numbers, there is about 1.6 billion in equity, which is our reserves. So that's over and above the amounts that's held for members' liabilities. So that's a comfort where, if you combine all the banks, their total reserve stands around 600 million. Whilst if you look at the financial soundness of FNPF, the total capital at the moment, apart from the liabilities, is almost 1.6 billion. And that is what the actuary does. So under the under the Act, the Reserve Bank mandates the FNPF to hold a legislative solvency of 10%. So just to put it in layman's language, that basically means for every $1 of member funds, FNPF is required by law to keep $1.10. So that's the legislative solvency. But what the fund has done, they've done even a more conservative approach. We've adopted through a policy a risk-based solvency approach, which is called the risk-based capital coverage. So that the board of FNPF has adopted that for every $1 of liability, the FNPF must have in its custody $1.25 worth of assets. So that's the additional safeguard FNPF has placed, and that all has been confirmed by the independent actuary. Again, our Reserve Bank comes and does on-site and off-site prudential supervision, because they are our regulators. And again, after COVID, we've seen major blows to our hotel properties. In terms of the physical presence, these hotels are very much present everywhere. You will see that our MOMI assets are still there, our Intercon hotel is there, GPH is still here, but valuations are not based on the physical property. Valuations are based on different methodologies, and our valuations are done on the cash flows that are actually earned from these hotels. So COVID-19, borders closed, tourists couldn't come to our shows, so obviously that has impacted FNPF hotel investments largely. So the cash flows from these hotels have come down. Again, we needed to correct the balance sheet as at 30th June. This is a requirement under IFRS. So we had engaged independent valuers, and these includes the likes of Colliers and BDO, who are specialists in these fields to value hotel properties. So these are the independent consultants and firms FNPF engages, apart from our own investment team that does desktop valuations, to provide that external comfort that the balance sheet is correct, the values that are reflected for our properties, our assets are correct. So that's the level of scrutiny done on FNPF books. So then these are attained through independent confirmations by the firms I've just mentioned. And again, last year was a unique year in the sense that FNPF board decided to get an additional check on the financial condition report, which basically was prepared by the in-house actuary. Then we engaged Mercer Australia to do a peer review of the financial condition reports, and they have actually certified that FNPF, even in a very best estimate scenario, has very high probability that they'll meet the statutory solvency of 10%. So those are the comforts that FNPF has given to our members.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Now, Mr. Vondonaivalo, the fund has said that it is solvent, and what does this mean, and why is it important for members to understand that FNPF solvency is position?
Again, just following from what our acting chief operating officer has mentioned, solvency means where you have more asset than your liability. Your asset can actually cover your liability, and that's quite important for members to know that their funds are safe, that we have the ability to pay when they liability matures, or when a member reaches 55, that we're able to pay when there's a that they've reached that age.
And Mr. Singh, has FNPF always been solvent?
Stella, to answer the question in just one word is no. If you go back to 2009, you may remember that FNPF undertook a major write-down on its investments. In fact, the total value of write-downs back in 2009 was close to 326 million. And that was a correction in itself, because 326 million back then was a major portion of our assets. In fact, the bulk of it came from the investment in Intercon, which is the Natandola Hotel. So back then, under the old FNPF Act, there was no solvency requirements. So these check and balances were not present in the old Act. So in line with best practice, we modernized our Act, we brought in all these solvency requirements, and in fact now it's a legislative requirement, a 10% legislative requirement that FNPF needs to always ensure it meets. Just to ensure it is sustainable, and it has sufficient and adequate assets to be able to meet member liabilities. In fact, we are a trustee fund. So at any point in time when the member decides to retire or comes of age, they come to FNPF and asks, okay, I want my money. So at that point in time, FNPF needs to make sure there is enough cash in the bank. We cannot go, because they are liquid assets and they are non-liquid assets like the hotel properties. So these are the things that FNPF didn't have back then. So we took a major write-down in 2009, but since then, the Act was changed in 2012, and these new standards were put in place. So every year on year, the auditors come and audits the books, and checks or actually checks the solvency requirements and provides the independent opinion and views whether the fund is solvent. So since 2009, we've never had a situation where we said, okay, we have a solvency breach. And in fact, it's good for the management and board to have such checks in place to be able to always be on a secure ground, rather than, like in the past, we didn't know, we couldn't estimate our liabilities. In fact, our pension liabilities prior to 2009 was a off balance sheet item. Now we've booked this in the balance sheet. We have got all these liabilities captured in the books, and against which we need to have sufficient assets to be able to pay these liabilities as and when they fall due. So this is in fact good condition, the good controls that have been placed in our FNPF Act.
Thank you very much for that interesting fact. Don't go away, we'll have our third and final segment after the break. Welcome back to our third and final segment. Mr. Vontonevalu, apart from member contributions, what makes up the fund's income?
Okay, first let me clarify, contribution is not an income of the fund. It's a liability to the fund. It's a liability that we have to pay when it's due. So that contribution is the fund that we actually utilize to fund our investment. And out of that investment, we credit members the income that we make out of the contributions. So apart from the other income for the fund, the main source of income is through fixed income investment. So that is mainly government paper, government bond, term deposit, other bonds with other statutory bodies. Apart from that, we have rental income from tenants of our properties that we own, and also from dividend from shares that we hold. That's including 88, the likes of BSP Group, Vision Group, to mention a few. So those are our main income sources.
What impact, if any, has the reduction in contribution rate had on investment?
Yes, reduction in contribution, we didn't feel the full brunt in the last financial year, but this financial year will have the major impact. It slowed our income, our investment a bit from a normal business condition, but even then, our forecasted level of investment for that year was quite substantial. I think in terms of last financial year, we still made around 400 million investment.
About 424 million. So like Billy said, COVID-19 came halfway through the year. So in fact, even if less than 6 months. So this year will be a full year of 12 months. So we really need to close in and zoom in on our investments and make sure that we've got sufficient investments which is able to pay required rate of returns, and FNPF is able to get a decent return on the investments. We are challenged with our equity investments because, like I said earlier, our hotels are not earning. So these may be areas where we will need to relook at and or reposition and rebalance the fund. So these are the strategies that the team will look at in terms of our outlook for the year. Yeah.
Just to add to that issue, I think the mention of reduction in interest members rate, that in fact doesn't, it relates to the COVID-19 impact. So the slowdown of economic activity. But in addition to that, it has impact the investment income also. So again, the impact will be known this financial year. Not much was seen last financial year.
Yes. And gentlemen, what is the outlook for FNPF in this year and going towards 2022?
Yeah, from an investment end, its investment environment is quite muted. It's not as like a normal business condition. But our forecast for the year is still quite substantial. We're forecasting around 700 million investment for the year. That's reinvestment of maturing investment and also new ones. But again, we've got substantial opportunity in the market that we intend to take advantage of.
Mr. Singh?
I think we remain positive. We continue to invest We have not stopped any of the investments because FNPF is a long-term player, and we continue to pay out COVID assistances. But I think in terms of FNPF's future outlook, we need to now start looking at how to build member balances, because in the last 9-10 months we've seen our members using up the GA balances, and as you know that one of the fundamental problems FNPF faces with our members is low member balance. So again, COVID has not helped. It's in fact it has aggravated the low member balances. So we need to now look at building member balances. We need to look at the informal sector. How can we cover people who were actually not assisted during COVID, because a number of our people who are in the informal sector and in unstructured employment, they were not able to get any benefit payment from FNPF for the mere fact that they are not FNPF members. It was only run to FNPF members. Again, because our coverage on the ground has not is not fully covering all the areas within Fiji, and we continue to advocate to the members, especially who are in irregular employment, who do not receive regular wage every fortnight or every week, to come and become voluntary members. Again, another thing that FNPF will probably be looking at is to set up a disaster fund, because in the past, like you said, FNPF continued to pay natural disaster assistance. For example, likes of Winston, Herald, Josie, Kenny, and the recent one Yasa. So these continued to exhaust member funds and deplete, and in some instances we've been quoting that close to 20,000 members just in COVID have exhausted their balances. So the primary role of FNPF is to make sure you've got retirement funds. So, but the Act permits us to pay natural disaster assistance, which is a legislative grounds of withdrawal. But on the same note, the preservation of 70% has also helped. We've seen in the last 5 years that the impact of preservation, which is the 70%, has in fact doubled the contributions. But events, unforeseen events like COVID, Yasa, these are not planned things, this just comes. So FNPF has created the 30% general account to be able to pay for this withdrawals and assist our members in during their times of need. Again, that's something that we will take to our board, a natural disaster fund, and there are other things planned which we will take to the board in terms of ensuring members have some continued income after they retire. So we will be looking at semi-mandating the informal sector, and these are things not new to the world. In fact, in some countries they have mandated pension, so there is universal coverage of pension. And it is time that Fiji comes on par with the rest of the world, because we've seen a lot of members who in their old age they look towards the government for social assistance, whilst the mandate of the fund is to ensure that every member has got that peace of mind after they retire. So we will have these will be bold decision that needs to be made, but it has to be mooted and it has to be taken to the next level. So we have this retirement security, we have the peace of mind when members retire. So these are some things that FNPF will be looking at in the near distant future. Stella?
Thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, Mr. Singh, Mr. Vontonaivalu, time has caught up with us, but I thank you both once again for availing yourselves for the interview tonight.
Thank you.
That's your close-up for tonight. For questions, please send us an email on news@fijitv.com.fj. Until next week, stay safe and good night.